My final question to you, Mr. Director, is do you know that it is a crime to lie to Congress?
I have not lied to Congress.
I didn't ask you that.
Lied to Congress is you.
At a Senate hearing where every word was supposed to be measured, FBI Director Kash Patel walked straight into the one question no law enforcement chief should ever make difficult. Do you know it is a crime to lie to Congress? That was not a trapdoor hidden under the floor. That was the front door of accountability, wide open, with Senator Chris Van Hollen standing there, asking a basic question after Patel had already been challenged over what Van Hollen called provably false statements, the firing of agents tied to Iran expertise, FBI resources shifted toward immigration enforcement, and then somehow a $7,000 bar tab dragged into the room like a political smoke bomb. This was not a normal hearing. This was a credibility hearing disguised as oversight.
I want to start with a question that Senator Coons asked you that relates to this article where the headline is Kash Patel's latest firings ousted agents with expertise in Iran. The article says that these individuals were fired for their role in the classified documents investigations of Donald Trump. First of all, is that true?
The article, just like all the other articles you cited, is false, and there's ongoing litigation, so I can't address it.
Okay.
Senator Chris Van Hollen did not open with theatrical outrage. He opened with a file of contradictions. He asked about reports that firings at the FBI removed agents with expertise in Iran, including individuals connected to the classified documents investigation involving Donald Trump. Patel called the article false, pointed to ongoing litigation, and tried to shut the door there. But Van Hollen kept pressing, because the issue was not whether Patel disliked the headline. The issue was whether the FBI had lost counter-espionage experience at the exact moment national security threats required seriousness, precision, and adult supervision. Then came the part that made the room tighten. Van Hollen moved from firings to resources, from resources to public statements, from public statements to truth itself.
You did answer Senator Coons, and I understood your answer to be that the people that were fired, that none of them were part of the group that had Iran expertise. Is that your answer?
No, he asked if they were Iran experts. I said they were not.
Were the group fired? Did it include people who were Iran experts?
No.
Did it include people who were involved in counter-espionage activities with respect to Iran?
I don't have the list in front of me.
So you don't know whether or not you fired people with counter-espionage experience with respect to Iran. You don't know the answer to that question.
I terminated anyone and everyone that weaponized law enforcement.
He said Patel had made provably false claims, including what Van Hollen described as right-wing media mythology about margaritas in El Salvador. And instead of calmly answering the legal question, Patel snapped back, denied lying, accused Van Hollen of chasing a Twitter narrative, and threw the $7,000 bar tab line back at him. That is the moment the hearing stopped sounding like oversight and started sounding like cross-examination. And this is where Chris Van Hollen's questioning became dangerous for Kash Patel, because Van Hollen was not arguing over tone, attitude, or political branding. He was building a sequence. First, the report said FBI firings removed people with expertise related to Iran. Second, Patel denied the article and said the fired people were not Iran experts. Third, when Van Hollen sharpened the question and asked whether the fired group included people involved in counter-espionage work related to Iran, Patel suddenly did not have the list in front of him. That answer matters because in a hearing room, I do not have the list is not the same thing as no. It is the difference between certainty and escape. And Van Hollen saw that opening immediately because if Kash Patel did not have the list in front of him, then how could he confidently tell Senator Coons or the public that those people were not part of the Iran expertise problem? That is not a small contradiction. That is the kind of contradiction that makes a hearing turn cold. It is like a hospital administrator firing an entire emergency surgery team, then telling the board no critical surgeons were removed, and when asked for the actual names, shrugging and saying, "I do not have the roster with me." Nobody serious would accept that. Nobody responsible would call that leadership.
Have you redirected resources away from your core FBI responsibilities toward the mass deportation effort?
No one at the FBI has been permanently reassigned on the immigration front, and when we pull the numbers, the FBI's overall operational field expenditures surged periodically for immigration enforcement activities, including the arrest of 2,000 people with direct ties to foreign terrorist organizations, was 2.4%.
Then Patel tried to reframe the entire issue with a line that sounded clean for television. He said he terminated anyone and everyone who weaponized law enforcement. That phrase is powerful because it sounds like accountability. But under cross-examination, powerful phrases become dangerous when they are not backed by evidence. Who exactly weaponized law enforcement? What document proved it? What finding established it? What disciplinary record showed it? What memo? What date? What internal review? What process? What standards separated legitimate counterintelligence work from political revenge dressed up as reform? That is the receipt problem. Patel offered a conclusion without showing the chain of proof. And Van Hollen's point was simple. When the FBI director talks about firing people, redirecting resources and public trust, he does not get to operate like a podcast host throwing red meat into a comment section. He is not just another partisan voice. He is the head of the federal agency Americans expect to investigate crimes, protect national security, handle counter-espionage threats, and tell Congress the truth when Congress demands answers. That is why the immigration enforcement exchange mattered too. Van Hollen asked whether FBI resources had been redirected away from core responsibilities toward mass deportation efforts. Patel answered that no one had been permanently reassigned. That word permanently did a lot of work. It narrowed the answer. It avoided the broader question. It created a technical escape hatch where the real issue was not just permanent reassignment, but whether temporary surges still pulled agents, time, money, and attention away from core FBI duties. And Patel eventually acknowledged temporary surges.
To respond to allegations that are made. You made these provably false statements that I know are sort of like urban legend in right-wing media about margaritas in El Salvador, which is provably false. And so
the pattern started to form. Deny the premise, narrow the wording, avoid the broad consequence, then attack the questioner. That is not transparency. That is verbal defensive driving. Van Hollen then moved to the center of the matter, credibility. He said Patel had made provably false statements. He said one of those statements came from what he described as right-wing media mythology. And then he asked the question that should have been the easiest answer of the day. Did Patel know it was a crime to lie to Congress? A normal FBI director answers yes. A careful FBI director answers yes, and then says he has not lied. But Patel did something else. He heard the question as an accusation, turned it into a personal fight, and refused to give the clean answer Van Hollen was demanding. That is why the room changed. Because when the nation's top FBI official cannot separate a legal principle from his own wounded ego, the problem is no longer just a heated exchange. The problem is judgment. The problem is temperament. The problem is whether Kash Patel understands that the badge does not belong to him, the bureau does not belong to him, and the truth does not become optional just because a senator's question cuts too close. And this is why the exchange became bigger than Kash Patel's attitude. A bad answer in a hearing can be corrected. A sloppy phrase can be cleaned up. A confused timeline can be clarified. But when the director of the FBI is asked about truth, and the response turns into a personal counterattack, that is not just bad optics. That is institutional decay showing its face in public. Chris Van Hollen understood the moral pressure point. He was not simply trying to embarrass Kash Patel. He was forcing the audience to look at the standard being applied to the most powerful law enforcement office in the country. Because ordinary Americans do not get to play word games when the FBI comes knocking. An ordinary citizen sitting in an interview room does not get to say, well, technically, I did not permanently redirect my answer. That is the ugly contrast here. The FBI has the power to investigate, subpoena records, recommend charges, build cases, and ruin reputations if that power is abused. So when the person at the top of that system starts dodging clean questions with political fog, the public has every right to ask whether the same standard of truth applies upward. That is the whole point. Law enforcement is not supposed to be a stage for personal revenge, partisan slogans, or fundraising narratives. It is supposed to be the place where facts survive pressure. But in this hearing, the facts kept running into a wall of denial, narrowing, and deflection. Patel did not just deny the article about the fired agents. He denied it broadly, then admitted he did not have the list when the question became more specific. He did not simply answer whether resources were redirected. He inserted the word permanently, then acknowledged temporary surges. He did not simply say, yes, lying to Congress is a crime, and no, I did not lie. He turned the moment into a fight over Van Hollen's motives, Van Hollen's character, and a $7,000 bar tab that did nothing to answer the legal question sitting right in front of him. That is the part viewers should not miss. A personal insult is not a receipt. A comeback line is not evidence. A sarcastic jab is not a legal answer. And when a director of the FBI reaches for those tools inside a congressional hearing, it tells you he either cannot defend the facts cleanly or he thinks he should not have to. That is where the moral scene comes in. Behind every political phrase in that room, there are real consequences. If counter-espionage experience was removed from the FBI during a period of serious Iran-related threats, that is not a cable news argument. That is a national security question. If FBI resources are being surged toward immigration enforcement while core investigative duties are being minimized or rhetorically brushed aside, that affects actual cases, actual communities, actual victims waiting for federal law enforcement to do its job. And if the FBI director treats congressional oversight like an enemy ambush instead of a constitutional obligation, then every American is being asked to trust a system whose leader resents being checked. That is not strength. That is insecurity wearing a suit. Chris Van Hollen's sharpest move was not raising his voice. It was refusing to let Patel hide inside political language. He kept dragging the conversation back to the same place: facts, statements, contradictions, accountability. That is why Patel's anger did not help him. It made the contrast worse. Van Hollen looked like a senator trying to pin down the record. Patel looked like a law enforcement chief trying to turn the record into a brawl. And the more Patel fought the question, the louder the unanswered question became. Does Kash Patel believe the same rules he would enforce against everyone else apply to him when he is under oath before Congress? That is the danger of this hearing. It exposed not only possible false statements, but a deeper contempt for the process that tests those statements. Because democracy does not collapse only when someone breaks the law. Sometimes it weakens when powerful people are asked simple questions and decide that answering directly is beneath them. And this is the lesson of the hearing. Power does not become trustworthy because the person holding it speaks loudly. Power becomes trustworthy when it can survive questions. That is why this moment matters beyond Chris Van Hollen and Kash Patel. This is not only about one senator pressing one FBI director in one tense hearing room. This is about whether the American people are still allowed to expect a straight answer from the head of the nation's most powerful investigative agency. Because when Kash Patel was asked about fired agents, he narrowed the issue. When he was asked about FBI resources, he narrowed the language. When he was asked whether lying to Congress is a crime, he acted as if the question itself was an insult. That is the pattern. And patterns are what investigators are supposed to notice. My view is simple. If the FBI director cannot answer a basic legal principle without turning it into a personal feud, then the problem is not the senator's tone. The problem is the director's relationship with accountability. The FBI is not a brand. It is not a podcast studio. It is not a political revenge machine. It is an institution with the power to search homes, seize records, investigate citizens, and shape the direction of criminal justice in America. So when the person leading that institution starts treating oversight like harassment, the public should be alarmed. Not because Chris Van Hollen is a hero. Not because Kash Patel is automatically guilty of every accusation thrown at him. But because a system built on truth cannot be led by someone who treats direct questions like enemy fire. That is the moral core here. The victims are not just the agents who may have been pushed out. The victims are not just the cases that may have lost experienced people. The victims are the citizens who are told every day to trust the system, obey the law, respect the process, and believe that facts still matter. So here is the question. If the FBI can demand the truth from ordinary Americans, why should ordinary Americans accept anything less from the FBI director? If you think this hearing exposed something deeper than politics, hit like. Drop your thoughts in the comments, share this video, and subscribe for more breakdowns of the moments powerful people wish disappeared quietly.